This is still a very competitive race. If the election were today, I'm not sure who would win. And I think it may well be President Trump because it's an electoral college fight.
Right.
And in those battleground states, and I've said several times here that, for a Democrat to win those battleground states, they have to have a significant lead in the electoral college.
Multiple people over at CNN have recently made startling admissions that maybe the Trump supporters are right about this election. Maybe the polls and all of the hype around Kamala Harris will not translate to reality. And we'll talk about that, react to it, discuss the state of this race here today. So folks, if you enjoy the content, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. And that said, I guess we'll start here where recently, this was last week at the DNC actually, CNN brought on David Axelrod, who is a chief strategist to Barack Obama, very respected guy in Democrat circles when it comes to this stuff, who actually admitted that if the election were held today, despite all of the hype, despite the convention and, oh, Kamala Harris, look at these polls, Trump would likely win this election. Let's take a listen and dissect the reasons why he is saying that.
Look, she has made extraordinary progress. We were all in Milwaukee a month ago, and, there was euphoria there and a sense that this race was over, that they were going to win by a landslide, perhaps sweep in big majorities in the House and Senate, and things have changed dramatically. But this is still a very competitive race. If the election were today, I'm not sure who would win. And I think it may well be President Trump because it's an electoral college fight.
Right.
And in those battleground states.
Yeah, we were looking at national numbers
right
at the top of this program. It's misleading.
And I've said several times here that, for a Democrat to win those battleground states, they have to have a significant lead in the electoral college. Remember, Joe Biden won by 7 million votes nationally last time, and a margin of 45,000 votes or 44,000 votes in the three closest battleground states combined. So she's right to be telling people it's good to be enthusiastic. That enthusiasm is really, really important for the Democratic Party, but you have to turn that into energetic action in order to win the election. And I think that's going to be part of what you hear here.
But wait, I assume the Democrats are saying, don't the polls say that Kamala Harris is way ahead? And it's like, okay, but you got to factor in a couple things. First of all, you're seeing a historic trend right now called summer response bias, which has favored Democrats a lot. It did in 2020, it did in 2016. It has in many elections before that. Let's check in after Labor Day when Republican voters historically come back and wake up into the election and see where we are then. But even with that in mind, even if you want to say Kamala Harris is winning currently in the polls, she's not winning by nearly the margins that Biden or Hillary were before. And sure, you could say maybe the polls are a little more accurate back then, but there's still not a lot of reason to be confident if you are a Democrat. But the third piece of information I'm going to point out here is that privately, and this is something that David Axelrod said on CNN a couple of weeks ago, and Jake Tapper admitted yesterday, which is that Kamala Harris's internal polls, and those are polls that are ran by the campaign. They're not published, but they're a lot more extensive and detailed because the campaigns want to know where they actually are in the race, right? Are not nearly as good as the ones that you are seeing publicly. So Jake Tapper reported this yesterday. He said he checked in with sources in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania today, and all of them said that the race is essentially tied within the margin of error. And of course, that's not what you're seeing necessarily from some of the public polls, although I will point out, if you look at the polling aggregate, right, because people like to focus on, look, this one poll right here says Kamala Harris is up by 1 million points. According to the RCP average at the current moment, nationally, Kamala Harris is only beating Trump by a margin of 1.7%, which is actually pretty atrocious for the Democrats, right? This very likely translates to a Donald Trump electoral college victory. And on top of that, you look at where Biden was in 2020, Hillary in 2016, they were up nationally like 7 points or something like that. That's actually an atrocious performance performance, again, when you don't just look at one poll, you look at an average of all of the polls, and even in the top battleground states, because we know this is what's actually going to decide the election. According to RCP, Trump is actually up 0.1% in the battleground states. Now, is that exactly great news for Donald Trump either? No. As Jake Tapper said, he's actually saying something true. CNN did for once say something true. This essentially means the election is tied. So we as the Trump supporters obviously have a lot of work to do, but the idea that we should be panicking because Kamala Harris is steamrolling us, no. And in many ways, again, like I said, it's still the summer. Starting next week is when the election actually begins. Republicans historically catch up. They start to build their lead or build their margins at that point. And still, despite everything we've seen in the past month, all of the enthusiasm boost for the Democrats, and they're very likely picking up the phone for way more of the polls than Republicans at this point, we are still very narrowly by the smallest hair in front in the battleground states, and I think we only have room to build there. And by the way, according to the current RCP average, despite all of the bias and all the problems we're seeing recently, we would win Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, which does translate to an electoral college victory still. Not saying to get complacent, certainly. It's very close, okay? I'm never going to deny that. It's very close. I am certainly not saying that Trump is way out in front, but the idea that he is way behind is also not true either. And again, some of Kamala Harris's internals are not looking nearly as good. Jake Tapper goes on. The latest in the blue wall states, in Michigan and Wisconsin, Harris is up maybe a point or two, but in Pennsylvania, she may be down a couple of points, the sources I spoke to said. She is certainly doing better than Biden was, and of course, I don't think anyone can deny that at this point. I mean, Biden was so bad at the end. Anyone can do better than Biden was, but in Pennsylvania, she has lost ground with white men, and that is very interesting because, first of all, even if she does win Wisconsin and Michigan, if Republicans win Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, see that number there? That is exactly 270 electoral votes. That means Donald Trump is your next president of the United States. And this is a very telling statistic right here. She has lost ground with Joe Biden in regards to white men, right? Especially that white working class in the more rural areas of Pennsylvania and the entire Rust Belt. And this is confirming the exact concern I brought up if you're a Democrat when they switched out for Kamala Harris, which is, yes, you're going to get increased enthusiasm, but if you lose with that white working class just a couple of points, you are not going to be able to match Joe Biden's 2020 numbers, and you're going to be losing in that election. So again, internally, Kamala Harris, they think they're down a couple points in Pennsylvania. And as most of you know, Pennsylvania most likely is going to be the state that wins this election. Yes, either campaign can still get 270 without Pennsylvania, but it seems like whoever wins Pennsylvania wins the election, right? Obviously. And according to Kamala Harris internally, she's down not just 1 point, but a few points in the state of Pennsylvania. And she is bleeding, right? She's hemorrhaging in her numbers with white men. And hey, all the demonization about white men being so evil, all this stuff, at the end of the day, they may be the very demographic group out there that elects Donald Trump. So maybe, you shouldn't have spent so long demonizing them. Just an idea if you're a Democrat, right? But Jake Tapper goes on to say, to be clear, this is not public polling info from Washington Post or CNN. This is from internal political polling that to which parties and politicians only have access. I understand skepticism about polling, but these internal polls tend to be more comprehensive and detailed. So it's obviously hard to say, but that seems to be more likely the truth of where this election is, which is when you turn out all of the hype, all of the noise, all of the enthusiasm, and go to what's really going on here. Demographically, in terms of her appeal, Kamala Harris does not do well in the Rust Belt, especially apparently, according to Jake Tapper, right, in the state of Pennsylvania. And it's a very close election. Okay, I'm not saying Trump's up by a landslide. There's certainly a lot of ground to be gained for both campaigns. This election's going to start really picking up after next week. But that said, said, you shouldn't be panicking about it either. Do not allow the demoralization agents to go around and have you convinced that there's no reason to vote or it's over, you know, the machine's gonna beat us. We are still very much in this election. Some would say we're actually still currently the favorite. However you want to look at it, though, just make sure you show up to vote in November, and let's do this, because we are not nearly in a terrible position like people think. It's not great, because great would be we're way out in front, but we can absolutely win this. So that said, let's go and get this done. All right, folks, that said, be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, follow me on X and all of my social medias, and until next time, God bless and peace.